Chapter 2, Section 5 is called Compound Inequalities. So that means two inequalities in the same problem. And they're going to be joined by either the word and or the word or. And is the intersection. And so we want to make sure we understand that. There's a symbol for it. It looks like this. If you ever see this, it's the same as and it's the same thing as the intersection. And the way I think of it is it's the overlap. So it's what both of them have, what they have in common. Now if you see or is the union of the two answers. And its symbol looks like this, which kind of makes sense to me because it looks like a U for union. And you have to remember that that's or. And in my mind, I think of that as being both areas. So that's just combining the two together. So they start out and they say, if they give you two sets, if A was 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8, and B is 3, 4, 5, and 6, so these are just given. They're saying A is this and B is this. They want you to then find both the intersection of A and B and the union of A and B, just to make sure we understand those. So I would say, and this is how your my math lab writes it, they use those squiggly brackets again, and they say X is such that, and then they list the intersection. So what is the overlap? What is in both A and B? And you can see that 3 is in both of them, 2 is not, so we're not going to write 2. 4 is in both of them, 5 is not, 6 is in both of them, 8 is not. So we're just going to write what they have in common, 3, 4, and 6. And that's our answer. Now, the union of A and B is both of them. So I'm going to write X is such that, and that means I'm going to write everything in this and everything in this. So I'm going to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. That is the union. Okay? Now, also know that if they want, they can write and, or they can write the intersection like this. You can see an X, and it looks like it's in between two different things. And that is like two problems. This is one of them, and this is one of them. So you could see this, and you could see this, and it implies the word and in between them. So if you see X in between two problems, that is the intersection. So this is what your homework's going to look like. They will say, for example, solve. And they could give you something like this. And it's just two inequalities like you just solved, but now they're joined by the word and or the word or for intersection and union. So you still just solve them just like you just learned. You add 7 to both sides, and here I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides and divide by 2, and 2 is not negative, so I don't flip my arrow. But here's what's new. Now, to draw that, I use one number line because they're in the same problem, and I put both numbers on my number line, and they have to be in order from negative infinity to positive infinity. So in my case, the 4 would come first, the 9 would come second. Then it says that X is less than 4, so I would maybe just write that really lightly. And it says that X is less than 9, so I'm going to write that really lightly too. Because I know that if the word in between them is and, my answer is only the overlap. So where did I shade both answers? I shaded both of them right here, didn't I? So my final solution is just this section right there that I've darkened. So our answer in interval notation would begin at my smallest point, negative infinity, with a parenthesis because we never include it, and it would end at 4. And look, at 4 it is also a parenthesis because it is not equal to. So that is my final answer for that. Let's try this one that looks like this, the funky way to write it. So this, if you want, you could write two problems. That would be one problem, and that would be your second problem. So you could just write two problems, and you could write the word and in between them, just like we had up here. Or we can go ahead and just solve for x by doing everything we do on all three sides of the inequalities. So to get x alone, I have to subtract 4, and I have to do it in all three sides of that inequality. So I now have -2 is less than -x is less than 3. Then to get x alone, I can see that I've got to get rid of that negative, and I'm multiplying by it, so I'm going to divide all three sides by the -1. And this is big, because don't forget, what do you have to do when you divide by a negative? You flip your arrows, and in this case I'm going to flip both of those arrows. So now I have positive x in the middle, and 3 divided by -3 is -3, and -2 divided by -1 is +2. So if you want, you can think of that's one answer, and that's your other answer. And so on my number line now, I have -3 because it's smaller. Make sure you write them in order, and then +2. And we'll just lightly shade our answer because we know our solution is the overlap. It's what they have in common. So if I say x is greater than -3, just really light, I'll write it out there. And right here, this is actually saying x is less than 2, isn't it? 2 is greater than x. So if x is less than 2, we're shading this side of 2. So just shading really lightly. And this is actually your typical and. Typical ands are going to be in the middle of the two. You can see the overlap is right there in between the two. So that's my final answer. And look, both endpoints are parentheses because they're not equal to. So my final answer is -3 up to 2. And that's interval notation for your solution. Alright, let's try an or. How about this one? What if I gave you, let's go to a clean paper, because I'll do 2 of them. So we'll want two examples on this paper. Alright, -2x minus 5 is less than -3. Or, so now or instead of and, 6x is less than 0. So once again, just reviewing, just solving each inequality, just like we did in the last section, adding 5 to both sides, dividing by 2. Oh, what does dividing by a negative do? Let's write that. -2 and -2. That's going to flip my arrow. And 2 divided by -2 is -1. And here, dividing by 6, you know, if you're not sure, plug it in your calculator. 0 divided by 6 is 0. So on my number line, I have two numbers. I have -1 and 0, and -1 is first, and 0 is second. So now, let's shade what they tell us. X is greater than -1, so I'm going to shade lightly over here. X is less than 0, so again, I'm going to shade over there. Now, if the word had been and, our overlap would be the middle, wouldn't it? But because the word is or, now we're talking about the union, or remember my abbreviation, both areas. So anything shaded is part of your answer. And we have -infinity to +infinity shaded. So that will actually be our solution. Anything shaded, if the word is or, is your answer. Alright, one more of those ors. How about this one? 5x subtract 3 is less than or equal to 10, or x plus 1 is greater than or equal to 5. So I'm going to go, the furthest thing from x is the 3, and so the opposite operation is to add 3 to both sides. And then I have to divide both sides by 5. So x is less than or equal to 13/5. And we never divide it by a negative, so we don't flip our arrow. And over here we just have one step. And so I'll write it down here by my other one. All I have to do is subtract 1 from both sides. So I have x is greater than or equal to 4. Now, the word is or, so anything you shade will be part of your answer. and you need to make sure you write those in order. So we know 13 divided by 5 is 2 point something, what, like 2.6 or something? So if my number, so it's smaller because it's between 2 and 3. So I'm going to write it right here, and then I would go 3, 4 right here. Now, this one says that x is less than 13/5. So I'm shading to the left of 13/5 to negative infinity. This one says it's greater than 4. So I'm shading the greater side, the bigger side, to positive infinity. And these say they are less than or equal to. So we know it's a bracket or a solid circle. Again, greater than or equal to. So in interval notation, this is how we write this. We begin with our furthest left, our smallest point. And we know we can never include infinity, so it has a parenthesis. And then we'll go all the way up to 13/5 where we have a bracket. And then this is the symbol that you write in between them. The symbol for or that we wrote at the top of our notes looks like this. And that's where it comes in handy. You could actually say it's this or this, but they'll write it this way. They'll use the mathematical symbol. It's this or this. And that's your solution. It can be either of those. And so that's the common or. The common and will be in between two. The common or will be out. But you've seen that you have to think about your answers every time, because sometimes they'll go all the way to the right, or sometimes they'll go to the left, or sometimes they'll be the whole thing. You just have to check and think each one through. Good job, you guys.